Welcome to Saturday Morning Office Hours. The topic for today is my podcast origin story. That's what I want to talk about today. I started podcasting in 2012. Is that right? No, 2013. 2012. I had to think about it for a minute. It's 2012. So I've been in radio since 2004. And I have been listening to podcasts since 2007, like heavily. I mean, listening to a lot. I was living in New Orleans in 2007, and I was living on one side of the city in Jefferson Parish and working on the other. So I had like an hour and 15-minute commute both ways. And so I was listening to dozens and dozens of shows a week. My first wife and I split up. We separated and divorced. We moved back to Ruston, Louisiana, where we live now, to raise our kids. And when I did that, I didn't have a commute. I was living in a little apartment right next to the radio station where I was working. So I didn't have that commute, but I still stuck with listening to podcasts a ton. I never even thought about doing my own show, really. I mean, I guess I had considered it once or twice, but I never gave it much real weight because, truthfully, I didn't know what I would talk about on an ongoing basis, and more importantly, I didn't know who I would do it with. Finally, I'm sitting in my bedroom, or I was standing in my bedroom actually. I had a stand-up desk at the time. I was working on my iMac. Now she's my wife, she's my girlfriend at the time, Kelly. I was telling her about a podcast I'd listened to that day, and she says, "Why don't you have your own podcast? You should do your own show." And I said, "Well, what would I do it about?" And she said, "Oh, you could just, funny conversations." "Who would you do it with?" And it was obviously I should do it with my buddy Josh. We were hanging out all the time. We had these great conversations. They were hilarious. People would like to listen to them, just like the people that were in the room with us like to listen to them. What would we call it? That night, for some reason, like right there, inspiration came out, and I said we call it Two Guys One Podcast. As soon as she said it out loud, Two Guys One Podcast, I said, "Ooh!" And the start of the show will be I'm one guy, and he'll say I'm the other. And I'll say, and this is the podcast. And for some reason, having that set intro all of a sudden made it a real thing. It made it a possibility for me. We were recording at the radio station every day, or every week. We would go into the radio station at night, and we would record generally just one episode at a time. And then we would sort of build up a little content. It wasn't really jokes. We were bringing like news stories to talk about and things like that. Pop culture things from our own lives, whatever. But that's how it started. The cool thing for me was that what happened was over time, there's an audience that develops for it, of course. But like our friends, people who never listened to podcasts before, they missed us, and they found out that they could listen to us every week, hang out together, and so they started doing that. And it built up a little community. It was fun to have inside jokes. It was fun to have people who knew about your life and who knew about your sort of, inner quirks and foibles, but that weren't also in your daily life. It was really an amazing time. And we didn't do a huge bit of business with that show. We ended up getting, at the end, I think we were up to 400 or 500 downloads per episode. And just after 100 episodes, we did like 107, I think, and we petered out. Our plan was to do one big finale episode, and it never happened. And at this point, I don't think it ever will happen. But what had happened while we were doing the show Two Guys One Pod, we began having these conversations every day. When we would come into the studio and we would start to do our show, we would talk about the podcast that we had both listened to the week before. I'd say, "Hey, I found this new football podcast, and it's awesome, and here's what it's like, and here's what it's about." And he would say, "Hey, I found a new comedian that has a podcast, and it's awesome, and here's what it's like, and here's what it's about." The more that we did that, the more that conversation lasted. Like at first it was like 5 minutes before we started, and then it was 15 minutes, and then it was 20 minutes. And finally one day, Josh said to me, "That podcast that we're doing before we actually do our podcast, it's a much better show than the one that we actually produce and send out to people. We should stop doing this show and make that show instead." And so we did. And so we closed down. This is my little plug for Fracture, by the way. Fracture.me, I think, or fractureme.com. My wife has ordered these for me. I've got one for Two Guys One Podcast, our first show, and I've got one here for the show that we created in its place, Pod on Pod with Josh and Joel. This is the show that we started doing, and we reviewed podcasts. We found a producer or a group of producers in California that were planning on starting a podcast network. They had a website, but they had not done any audio yet. I thought to myself, these guys need us as much as we need somebody for support. I wanted somebody to help promote it on the back end, and I wanted somebody to really help me make the show run like a business, which I had decided to do, and Josh was on board with. So we started Pod on Pod with teamprocreate.com, and they were really great. We had a great run with them just over a year. We ended up moving to Blog Talk Radio after our relationship with Jay Soderberg cemented at Podcast Movement a couple of years ago. And when we made that move, we knew we were going to end up breaking with Team Procreate. And in that process, we thought for a while we were going to lose the domain and the name because they were in control of it, and we didn't really have agreement on how that was going to work. In the end, we were able to keep it, and we kept our whole audience. But because we thought we were going to change the name, we were brainstorming other ideas, and we came up with Always Listening. And now, anybody that's watching this video probably knows me from that show, Always Listening podcast reviews from Josh and Joel. Josh is semi-retired now. He's been very busy. We just put out a new episode actually this past week. Yesterday, I pushed that live featuring Josh. But in general, he's not going to be available. I have switched to a solo format. And so in general, you're going to get individual episodes from me. They will come out Wednesdays. This Wednesday, for instance, there's going to be a review of the Dad podcast. That's what I'm going to be talking about this week. That's my podcast origin story. The thing that I wanted to talk about today was creating content when and where you can. So today, I am in a closet. I work from home. I work from this closet. I edit and produce in this closet. I record in this closet. Even voice work, even audiobook narration, right here, using either this mic, which is an ATR 2100, or a PD mic 58, PD MIC 58. Those are the two mics that I use. They're both very cheap. This one's about $60 or $70. Pile's $16. So today I'm going to spend most of my day out of the closet because I'm actually going to be spending some time with my girls. My daughters are here. They're downstairs. My wife, Kelly, is on a shopping trip with my mom and my sister. So they're having a great day today over in Texas. And I've got the kiddos to myself. Now, I knew I wanted to do this Facebook Live video because I'm on this 14-day challenge. I wanted to tell you my podcast origin story. And so how did I accomplish that while I'm also taking care of the girls? Well, the front door is locked. The TV is on. They both have an iPad. And the dog is guarding everything. So I'm creating this content when and where I can. In a closet, which is pretty quiet. Using my microphone and my 3-axis gimbal to be able to film the thing. And I'm not even using a microphone today because the microphone built into the iPhone's pretty darn good for simple Facebook Live videos like this. You can create content. You can make a podcast, a weekly podcast even if you want to, and you can do it on your own schedule. Things like batch recording, for instance, recording multiple shows all at once. That's really, really important if you're going to produce content regularly and you want to make sure that you actually get it out to your audience. I was talking with a potential client today, a great guy named Hal based out of Florida, and that's one of the things that we talked about for him is like, hey man, pick one Monday a month and let that be your recording day and do 4 interviews. Do a couple of solo recordings, and then boom, you've got all your content sorted for the whole month. Then you can farm it out to me, or even work through it yourself if you're going to be your own editor and producer. But if you want to produce video, if you want to produce audio, if you want to even produce blog content, batch processing is the thing that you need to think about first and foremost. But if you're watching this video, if you have a question about any of the things that I've talked about, how to get your podcast started, what equipment you would need, and you're worried about, oh, I need a bunch of fancy stuff, huh? If you're worried about getting your message out there once you create the content and making sure that people are actually hearing it, I've got some tips for all of that. So ask in the comments below. I'll be active. I'll answer here probably. You can always message me on Facebook. You can get more videos like this by following me here, and subscribe, please. Tomorrow. What's the topic of tomorrow? Well, you're going to have to tune in to see. Thanks for listening to this one. Thanks for watching.